goes. Wow. All right. Welcome to Eve 2020. It is June 22nd. And this is Matt Earl, and this is McLeod. How you doing, McLeod?
Hello. I'm good, man.
So we're up and running a bit late because we've had some technical issues as we learn new tools, try to figure out how they work, and then fix things that break on the fly, which happens. Yesterday we had a show that was pretty important. I think it was a historical show, and that we had Billy from Test Alliance, leader of the Legacy Coalition, talking to Pando from the Initiative, part of Imperium. Longstanding tensions there kind of erupt on the show. We also had Killa B on the show with Hi Want To from Snuff, and all of them have been involved in a Northern Theater in Pureblind and Fade, which was really active in the last couple of weeks. But the big news yesterday was that there is an end to the Imperial Legacy Super Coalition between the Imperium and Legacy Coalition. So Vili announced that in 2 weeks, on the 5th, I believe, that the non-invasion pact, and that's different from a non-aggression pact, the non-invasion pact would cease to exist, and therefore the opportunity to invade would be open. And that was big news. And so we had those people on to talk about it yesterday on Talking in Stations. You'll get that podcast today. Well, anyway.
So do we want to go through any kind of nomenclature regarding that or not? Like, you did like a brief synopsis of what nips and naps are.
Yeah, a non-invasion pact means that you can't come into my area and take my things or destroy my structures. It means you can come in and we can fight ship to ship for some fun, but no serious sovereignty work is done on me or me on you. A non-aggression pact means...
Hang on.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they talk of blue trolls, like you might hear that word being used every so often inside of, like, you know, certain Eve circles and stuff. Blue trolls generally tend to be people who you have nips with, so you can still fight them, you can still shoot them, like you're not invading them, which is kind of where people consider to be you're neutral, as if you can shoot them, but you're blue because you don't invade them. So that's where the term blue trolls comes from.
Right. Good point, actually. Anything else on non-invasion pacts?
Just thinking, actually. A lot of time, non-invasion pacts tend to also include things like shooting each other's, well, maybe not shooting each other's radders, but essentially not, like, you know, things like camping people's systems and stuff. Like, generally, that's not a thing that blue trolls tend to have, or people with nips tend to have.
Yeah. I'm glad you stopped me on this. Nips and naps.
And also, you know, as is Twitch policy, there's no nips on Twitch. Took you a moment.
It took me a minute. I was like, come on, hamster, run faster. Oh, there's electricity, brain working. Ah, that's a dirty joke.
It is.
Very funny. Very funny. So the non-invasion pact allows you to become blue neutral, but it doesn't allow you to take SOV or damage the infrastructure of the place. Non-aggression pact, what's that?
That's basically when you are actually blue to people. Essentially, it's when you're in a like a coalition, you basically have non-aggression pacts with other alliances. Yeah. So essentially, it's, you know, you're friendly with them. You don't aggress them in any way, shape, or form, let alone invade them.
I think one of the bigger areas where this is...
You don't aggress them in any way, shape, or form.
Oops, 1 second.
Let alone invade them.
I think one of the bigger areas where this
You
is
don't aggress them in any way, shape, or form.
Oops, 1 second.
Let alone it. There are times when people have a very fleeting non-aggression pact. Sometimes that happens, at a very strategic or a very tactical level in particular fights. Like sometimes you may be on a fleet that goes into a fight where you're third partying, and there was a very quick but sort of a mutually agreed non-aggression pact, like a very temporary non-aggression pact. Generally what that would look like on a very temporary basis when you're going into a fight is essentially your FC basically saying, don't fire on neutrals, only fire on reds or people who I specifically say, or people who I specifically broadcast a target. Typically, that's because either there's a tactical advantage to doing so. Typically, there is a tactical advantage to doing so, but there is either not the capability of turnaround in terms of organization or red tape to be able to put that like standing change into overall kind of circulation, either because it's temporary or because for whatever reason people aren't online be able to do so. But that's a very specific version of a non-aggression pact that isn't just bluing people who for long term.
Yeah. I want to say hello to Nisi and Vital Remains. Vital Remains. I put my Italian on that one. And Undead Horror. Hi, you guys. Good morning. Thanks for joining us early on. Glad you could catch it live. And where's your CCP, Sergeant? Okay. Hi, guys. It's nice to see you all. We're talking about nips and naps and what they mean in reference to some of the stuff you're going to be hearing the rest of the show, and what's going on with Legacy Coalition and all that stuff. So,
yep,
we'll see. Okay, so non-aggression pact you defined. I would say where it comes into play as a big deal is renters, right? Are you hitting my money-making infrastructure? Not just are you hitting my engineering complexes, are you hitting my Fortizars or my marketplaces, these kinds of things. The question is, are you hitting my money-making endeavors? Because I rent territory not to myself, but to somebody else. And I don't want you disturbing them because they're paying me for peace. And I'm supplying that. So a non-aggression pact means don't hit my money-making opportunities, essentially. Non-invasion pact means you can hunt me, you can hunt my guys, you can have some fun. You can somewhat disrupt my money-making process, but do not cripple me by destroying my infrastructure or taking my territory. That's a non-invasion pact. So those two things are different. And what the Imperial Legacy had was a non-invasion pact. That allowed Imperium alliances like the Initiative, for instance, to use wormholes to get all the way down to legacy space in the south and destroy some of their miners, destroy some of their pilots that were around. Did you ever go on any of those fleets, McLeod?
I went on some of them for sure. I definitely went on some of them. I can say for sure that Test has a very robust rescue package for their miners and for their radders. It's very well honed and very well seasoned. I have participated in a fair number of, usual sort of Stuka fleets going through wormholes to, here, there, and everywhere. And many times we ended up in test space or in legacy space, and coming to terms with the onslaught of a huge amount of fighters and support fighters and superiority fighters and stuff like that. Kind of like the bane of well, I mean, almost anyone's existence really, if you're trying to take on a large group. But it is what it is. You know, you can't exactly complain about someone protecting, you know, their people, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're gonna rent out empty territory that you're not using to people, you're gonna want it to be worthwhile. Otherwise, they'll question why they're paying you money to get raided all the time. It's just a basic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's too bad. I'm looking at sovereignty on the jump map. Let me just show you what I'm fiddling with so you guys can help me out. Let's hide ourselves here and bring up the map. Whoa. So if you're doing sovereignty and you say just give me sovereignty by standings, it's standings according to you. Which doesn't help me because this is basically those are empires and pirate factions. I guess this is what I'm looking for. Yeah,
It used to be
it used to be much easier.
There used to be, I don't know whether it still works or whether there's still functionality in it, but there used to be a site called Eve Skunk, which was it's basically the thing that a lot of corporations hate because it meant that essentially you couldn't really transmit sort of corporation sensitive or alliance sensitive information via in-game mails because someone could, on the site, essentially someone could submit an API with information like corp mails and alliance mails, as well as standings and stuff, and essentially be almost anonymously real-time sharing people corps and alliances emails as well as their standings. And we used to get standings information from there. It was a good tool to be able to understand people's standings. Sorry about the background sound.
Yeah, it's all right. So what we'll do is switch over to something that's a little easier to see, and that is Dotland here. And we'll go into the universe. Actually, let's go into Tenerifis.
I mean, if anybody out there has information on how to glean factions like sort of corporation standings between each other, you know, I'm all ears, of course. But as far as I know, Eve Skunk was the best, and I'm not entirely certain whether there's a new and better resource available out there. But let's carry on, Matt.
Yeah. Did you just snap your fingers? I heard a snap.
I think I did, yeah. Randomly.
I was like, what?
Let's go.
All right. Hurry up. All right. So if you can see on this map, we'll zoom in a little bit. Legacy is all these groups, really. Legacy is a coalition of alliances, and the alliances are all led by essentially the strongest alliance, which in this case is Test Alliance, and you can see them here in orange on the left. Let's see if I can select one of there. And if we click on Test Alliance, we can find out more information about them specifically. And if we click, if we look down here under sovereignty changes, that's for this system, but let's look at Test as an alliance. And we can see under sovereignty systems, this is the territory where they reside. So we know they're mostly in Detroit, Esseteria, Fate Diabolus, Immensia, Paragon Sol. They're all over the place because they're probably owning key systems in those areas. But mostly they're in the south. We would call it the south of EVE Online. I'll show you what that looks like. Now, we're talking about Test this morning. Why are we talking about Test? Let's go into what happened yesterday and what's going to happen in this near future if we can.
So we heard rumblings of that there was going to be something somewhat seismic happening around the 1800 Eve time on Sunday, involving Test in some way, shape, or form. So that was one of the reasons why why our Sunday show was sort of postponed by a couple of hours.
Right. So we got wind that there would be some big news happening um, that day at 1700. 1 second. Will I just take care of that?
Hmm. And essentially what happened was
There.
it took a little while, but was it Villy who who released a not released an internal statement on their forums that was subsequently leaked, as it always is.
Well, yeah, like we were. It's funny enough. We were saying, okay, there's this conflict going on between Snuff and the Imperium, mostly initiative. So what happened there was that Snuff decided they were going to leave. They were going to stand down and leave the game for a while, and so they sold some moons to the initiative and took off. For a while, a few months maybe, and then they just kind of laid low. But then when they came back and started reconstituting and started to get more active, they were looking for targets, which is what they do, regardless of friendships and stuff like that. They're always looking to keep busy. So they looked at targets and they said, well, let's get some of these moons back from the initiative. So they didn't ask for them back. They tried to take them, I believe. And actually, it wasn't just moons; it was actually structures and that sort of stuff that were under attack. The initiative, I think, you're an initiative, so correct me if I'm wrong. Took this as an aggressive action, and even though the initiative and Snuff were friends and had worked together in the past, in fact, both had been in part of Imperium. In fact, Snuff probably joined the Imperium not only to do a little bit of mining in Aquarius down south where it was safe, but also because they saw how much independence the initiative had with the Imperium, so it wasn't a bad idea to get involved there. There wasn't a lot of commitment, and there was some money to be made. So initiative kind of led the way for Snuff to join the Imperium. But alas, the lack of opportunities for fighting over the last few years made Snuff want to go back to being an independent. And it went independent before it kind of got quiet. So it's come back, and now it is fighting its old friend, the Initiative. Well, the Initiative is backed up because it's part of the Imperium, so the Imperium got involved as well, and most of these fights happened in the northern hemisphere here, in Pureblind and Fade, way up here. And I think it was pretty clear yesterday from the guests that we had on that the Imperium caught the worst part of that. And the Initiative had to start taking down structures and moving back to their home down here in Fountain. Let's get the right Fountain. J5 should be here, I believe. Got it. Yeah, no. Yeah, J5A. Famous system, you could tell it's important because it's really at the center of... I'm sorry, it's not at the center. It's at the edge of Fountain, which allows access to more northern areas like Outer Ring, Cloud Ring, Pureblind, and Fade. So it's an important point. It's like where you would put a fortress. You can see it right here. We'll zoom in on it.
It's like Craster's Keep. if you know anything, if you've seen Game of Thrones, essentially,
it's Craster's Keep.
Is it Craster's Keep? I can't remember. I think it's Craster's Keep. The bridge across the river. There's no real kind of bridges anywhere else nearby, so you have to kind of go through it, and
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's why they retreated to that point. So right now, the Imperium and the Initiative with them has taken a defensive posture by retreating back into Fountain, which sits above Delve, Fortress Delve, they call it. So that's really their stronghold, and this is their forward operating. These are the gates. Crestus Keep. You have to cross through there in order to get into Fountain. And what was happening up there, so that was considered more or less a victory for Snuff, and Snuff had roped in other powers as well, like Horde was there, and so was NC Dot, so was other groups, actually not just null set groups that are opposed to the Imperium, but also low set groups like people that actually Snuff are usually fighting against, Siege Green, and I think there was one other there, forget the name at the moment. Also, one of the interesting things that's happening lately is that the initiative, I've heard, I don't know if this is true completely, is they are trying to help Shadow Cartel establish itself in a stronger way. Shadow Cartel has been dormant for a while. Shadow Cartel is the enemy of Snuff and has been for generations. They have both contended for the crown of who's the most powerful in low sec. And Shadow Cartel was the competitor for Snuff.
Hang on, so that was, hang on, what, like Init's helping reestablish Shadow Cartel?
Yeah, I've heard that rumor.
Okay, I haven't heard that rumor, and I kind of haven't. Well, I haven't exactly been massively active in the initiative, but I haven't heard anything or RE Shadow Cartel in chats and stuff that I've read. But
yeah, well, it could have been just hoping out loud that Shadow Cartel would get stronger or something. But I think there was some information about them being helped in some way, but I'm not sure that's true. We'll have to find out more about that. In any case, it's a small detail on a larger narrative, which is that Snuff and Initiative are opposing each other pretty viciously now. So Initiative has rolled back, picked up some structures and moved themselves back to JA, as you can see there, and that's where they're waiting for possibly more attacks if this continues. Now, that is the background of what happened last week, and then yesterday. There was a huge announcement made. That was made by Villy. And he told his guys that the cooperation between Delve and you can see them here, these three systems, these three regions here essentially are dominated by this one here, Delve, and that is the Imperium, right? They also, you can see, dominate Fountain as they're connected right there. Through a famous system too that's called YTAC2, because that is the gate down to Delve and these three systems. So we call it like the Tri-Delve region or something. That would be Quarius, Period Basis, and Delve. Now those are connected. Yep. I believe they're connected. Is it all the way over here? It's over here. There we go. So you can see Paragon Soul connects to a Period Basis. So there's basically a back door between Legacy and the Imperium. So it was in their interest.
There's also there's also a somewhat front doorish between Catch and Quirius as well.
Let's check out that gate.
That is the entrance to that gate is a fairly well, not synonymous for anything in particular on Tranquility, but on Serenity, it is 49 Tech U, which is the site of basically Serenity's version of BTEC-R. And some.
Oh, it's funny that happened in 49 TAC, because that's actually where Bob's last stand was years ago in like 2009, when Band of Brothers was surrounded, camped in, and for days. So that's a famous system too, and it's a gateway over to the other part of the southern map. You can see Goonswarm owns 4 TAC 07 because they want to control that border. And they don't want Test or Brave to control that border, so they can have more influence on it. That puts them right into Catch, right? So, Goonswarm has a system basically that's right at the gateway of Catch. Again, this is good for capital projection, because capitals rely on light year range. They don't when they jump in a certain radius on the map. So if your radius starts at 49. TAC in Quarius, you're only going to be able to jump to Quarius or Delve. This gap is too big. But if you jump one gate over to 4 TAC 07, this now allows you to jump and influence everything inside of half a catch at least. And also you can jump into stain from here because it's a circle. It's like a bubble in that area. So that's how capitals work. And that's why you want to control not only your gate, but the gate on the other side when you're talking about regional, when you're talking about regional gates. So yeah, 49U is storied, and there are links between Legacy, as you can see there, and also in Paragon Soul. So there are neighbors to a certain degree on at least two fronts, two systems, two regional gates. So that is one of the reasons it's a big deal, because what you have now is you have a northern border happening up here, northern fight in JF5 with not only some low sec powers, but some null sec powers. If they're still going to move down into Fountain and continue the pressure, that's a front that will need to be reckoned with. And that means that down here with Legacy, you're talking about what's possibly a second front. If Legacy decides that they want to go to war. So the question is, why is Legacy clearing the way? Why are they saying, you know what, we know you're having a fight with the northern powers right now, but now is the time for our non-aggression pact, our non-invasion pact, to end. But we're not going to do it right now and surprise attack you. We're going to say 2 weeks. 2 weeks, after 2 weeks, we can attack each other's space, which is a kind of a nice thing to do. Usually you don't get that kind of thing. It's usually like, you know what? I'm ripping the deal in half and we're going to go after each other. So it doesn't mean that Legacy is going to attack Goon Swarm the Imperium, or Test is going to attack Goon Swarm, because they've been on and off friends for a while. They have history together. Vili himself was a part of Goon Swarm for a long time. But it does mean that that option is going to become available, whereas before it wasn't available.
The thing is, like, when you look at Test's sort of options as to what they can do, right? They can potentially start attacking Delve without really saying or showcasing any kind of agreement or any kind of coordination with northern forces of ELNC, Fraternity, that kind of stuff. But Fraternity could, those forces could very easily take that as a cue to come in straight to, J5A and Fountain and start attacking there as well. But, that depends entirely on how Test wants to play it. I don't think Northern forces will want to, try and take on Imperium in J5A without some kind of diversion or some kind of situation where, where Imperium are fighting a war in two fronts.
Yeah.
But that remains to be seen right now. Like that's all what ifs in the air right now. And obviously we have 2 weeks of this because the non-invasion pact is still non-aggression pact is still in place. Non-invasion pact, is still in place for another 1 week and 6 days, I think.
Right. Let's see if it holds. And that's a comment by Yao Lo there that says, let's see if the NIP holds for that 2 week period. Here's the complicating factor, which I think is really interesting. Inside of Empire Space, let's go to Empire Space. I'll just type this in so I can find it among all these little stars here. But it's a parameter is how I think of it. But the system is actually called perimeter. That didn't work.
You Americans always have issues with meters.
Eater. We'll find it that way. I'm using the search function. Solar systems. Perimeter. Yes, it's meter. Boop.
Like up periscope. how far? A meter.
Yeah. Let's turn off our, there we are. Perimeter. Inside a perimeter, as you can see, it's one jump away from Jita, that blue line. Now, perimeter is an interesting system because it is home to the Tranquility Trade Tower. I bet I could find it in here somewhere. And the Tranquility Trade Tower, the TTT as it's known, is a keep star. It's one of the few in HiSec. I think it's the only one in HiSec. Here are some of the refineries. And I'll find it. It's near the gate, I believe. So the trading tower is basically a place where people can trade goods. That used to be, Plex and injectors were the biggest thing that were traded there. But now there's other things that are traded there, like minerals and stuff like that. So perimeter is the home of that tower. It is controlled by Test Alliance. Test put that structure up. But in order to secure it, they needed to do a very interesting thing. They needed to get their enemies of Horde and Pandemic Legion and all the people in the north not to destroy it or contest it. They could contest it, maybe not destroy it, but they could cause a lot of trouble. And at the same time, they needed to get their non-invasion pact friends in Imperium to do the same, not to campaign against it and destroy it. And in doing so, what Vili specifically was able to do is create a peace between the North and the South that would allow this kind of structure to exist. And he did it by giving them part of the profit. So that is a very wise and smart move. You're paying people off. Everybody's making money. There's no reason to destroy this thing. And there's also peace, more or less, through treaties and through negotiation and diplomacy. And that allowed perimeter to prosper, at least the trading.
So long as, the thing is, so long as you're being, entirely transparent to the people to both sides, essentially, to the people who would potentially, see this as an issue and come and destroy it. Like, as long as you're being completely transparent about, the cut of profits, then everyone's involved. Everyone's, would be fine with it. If someone's getting a cut of the profits without having to lift a finger or do anything, essentially basically getting a cut of the profits for not doing something, then, they'll be fine as long as they feel like, the wool isn't being pulled over their eyes as to the true profit that's coming out of that particular tower or that particular location. Obviously, if you start obfuscating and obscuring, the true wealth, the true value and the true wealth coming out of there, then people can potentially look to it and kind of go, well, hang on, you're reneging on the deal that we agreed upon, and you're taking more of what you said you wouldn't, sort of thing. So there is an incentive, obviously, for Test to be completely above board and transparent with every single person who has entered into agreement with basically defending TTT. And it's obviously within those people's best interests to sort of defend it, or at least not attack it, in order to make sure that profit is constantly flowing and coming through to them.
Yeah. All right. So I've found it. It's just hard to pull up somewhere in here. It is. But anyway, you can see that it's right near the Jita gate. Okay. So the important thing here is, like, this is something that is valuable, and it is something that is now at risk, because with the severance of the non-invasion pact, you could see how that might become a problem. It might not, right? You're saying, I'm dissolving this non-invasion pact. That doesn't mean I'm invading you. It just means that I don't want to be restricted not to invade you, but we're still okay. We're still neutral. I don't want to attack you, that sort of thing. And you can still collect your money. Billy confirmed this on the show yesterday, that the Imperium is still entitled to their share of the profits from not only this trading tower where the marketplace is, but the engineering complexes that are right next to it that allow people to build ships at a lower cost. And that sort of whole network of stuff. They also have, let's see if I can find it on this map here. A few jumps away is Ignoitin, which just recently got put up, and that's a low-sec trading tower. Oh, it's going to be off this one. Here it is. There it is. There, you could see how close it is to Jeddah and how close it is to perimeter. Even though this is in a different region, Ignoitin is, it's basically a supply line because it's a low-sec system bordering on high-sec, which allows you to jump capitals like jump freighters into Ignoitin or a low-sec system. And then one jump out and you're into more safe territory like high-sec. And you're only 3 jumps away from Jeddah, the massive trading hub in EVE Online, but you're only 2 jumps away from perimeter. So that's a good place to set up a logistical point. And they did it in the form of a keep star. So now you have a keep star in low-sec and you have a keep star in high-sec. Both those combine to make a bit of a trading network, a tranquility trade network, I guess we'll say. And that is being protected by Vili. And he's done that with assurances from both sides. Well, he's just angered one of those sides. So you have, hello, GigX. How are you doing? We were just talking about you yesterday. Watch yesterday's show. You came up, so you should check that out. I'll just give you the TLDR, GigX, if you're out there, that all the FCs that play the game, not all, but most, agree that you were a critical loss to EVE Online. You're the kind of player that they need in the game, especially over the last year. So there you go. That's about as flattering a comment that can be made about you from FCs. Not you specifically, but a person. So test is...
It's good to know that, like, even outside of your group, you know, you're somewhat missed. So, you know, that's all good. It was good to know.
Right.
He was watching. Fair enough. Okay.
Cool. Good. So the point is, this makes it very interesting and also puts the stakes a lot higher than normal because Vili is essentially putting at risk this thing that he's built and has wanted to build. Let's actually put our faces back up. There we are. So this puts at risk something that is valuable. But the non-invasion pact, I was saying, doesn't mean he's going to invade. It just means he has the option to invade. But what it also does, it releases the Imperium from the option to invade him, because obviously it's works both ways. So what we have is an ambiguous situation at this moment where in a certain amount of time, if it's not violated, a non-invasion pact between Legacy and the Imperium will go away, and then we don't know what will happen. It is predicted that there's going to be a huge invasion of Delve because that is, well, I don't know if it's predicted, but the Imperium is sounding the bell saying, we know all about your plan. We know you're coming and we're ready for you. Bring it on. That's almost exactly what Matani was saying on his meta show, where he put out the idea that he has discovered their plans. He was aware of them all the time, the Black Hand, and some of the careless memos that are going around from test members like Pro God Legend on FC there. We've put together that you guys intend to invade us, and we're ready for you. Bring it on. We're Fortress Delve, and we have strong gates for you barbarians. My words, not his. So that's what some of the political rhetoric coming out of the Imperium is where it's at right now. And he said, or I think it was said, that this smells like World War B. Now, World War B was the last time the Imperium was seriously invaded. They lived up in the north in Decline. So we'll go up there and look. They were way up here in Decline. You see how long Decline is? It's very long. So it's it means that you can't really invade it with capitals easily. You need to get in to the back of it, which you can do here. God, these are tiny, tiny dots. Let's see if I can find that. Oh, over here. You need to get into deck line way back there, or you need to get in the middle, or you have to get in on one of these sides here in order to use capitals in that area, which is difficult. So it's almost like if you can imagine Eve as a landscape, this is a hill. And so putting your castle on a hill has advantages. You can see people coming a long way away. It allows you to get on a war footing quicker. And there's very few surprises. You only share, you share like 3 borders, but they're mostly condensed down here into the south area. So Deckline has always been known as a place that's easy to defend. And when the Imperium was there, they owned, I wouldn't say they owned, but they controlled a coalition that comprised of pretty much all of this North Branch and Venal and Tribute, right? And Vale as well. But more than that, they controlled way up here.
They're saying that they can't see it because pictures are.
Let me get rid of that. Sorry, because I had a cool effect on that. Decline. Cool, right? Now, now you can see it better. So what I'm saying is it's hard to, it's easy to defend because it has entrances that are like, it doesn't allow you to use capitals effectively on Deckline because it's so long and thin. Unlike, say, a purblind, right? Like a purblind, you can reach a lot of it if you're in the center of it, because you remember you have that light year radius for your capitals. So you can go left, you can go right, you can go up, you can go down. Deckline's not like that. Deckline, you can really only go up and to the left or down and to the right. It's not a bubble. So, if you look at other places like Tribute, it's that has like 2 sections on it, right? So your capitals from the far left of that area can't really move to the far right of it easily. So that's more defensible than something like Purblind, or even worse, like a Cloud Ring, which is on top of each other. You see how that's all on top of each other? So one system there, if you put all your capitals into it, you'll be able to reach all these systems. You'll be able to reach almost the whole region. By the way, as a quick side note, that's one of the reasons that the Oasa is such a preferred place. You see, Oasa is a system that will overlap many other regions, allowing you to really project your capital ships because it's so condensed. It's all balled up on top of each other, so you can really protect it from the middle of it. Oasa is one of those areas. It's the middle of it. I don't know why those jump bridges are lit. This character must be. They must not have changed its standings with Horde or something. I think I had standings with Horde or something because I was moving out, and I don't think they changed it, but they will now. Okay, so the point was when Goonswarm was living over here in this very defensible area, they controlled more or less the regions around them, the buffer states, and they had members like FCON or CO2 or TNT or Sebastian, all these groups that belong to the Imperium in surrounding regions that were all here. And Venal is not an NPC, so that's not, you can't own it, but you can kind of patrol it and keep it safe. So what happened was a war opened up in 2000, I believe it was 2015 April, where a lot of people were paid money from essentially casinos, right? Or a casino in EVE Online that had trillions and trillions of ISK, and it could make ISK because it was a money printing machine. And it gave a ton of money to multiple alliances. And those funds were used to cover their costs as they attacked the North, Goonswarm and its allies in the Imperium. And it had multiple fronts. You had fronts up here in Tenal. They were attacked by groups from the Dronelands. And there was attacks in Vale. that was all attacked from Losec down here in Losec the Forge and Losec Lone Trek. These are staging areas here, like Hakonin. See how Hakonin reaches both into the Forge and into Vale, but Hakonin is a nice spot because you can move directly up into Tribute, up into here to MTAC O, which is a famous system with multiple battles historically. And you can move right quick into Obo, which is down here. Let's see if I can grab it. And Obo leads you right into Vale and that whole area. So one system gets you like 2 to 3 jumps into 2 different regions that are quite big. And that's where the northern attack would come from. And I think in Lone Trek, I had Saranen is where they retreated up here somewhere. There. So the Imperium collapsed. This is a World War B 2015 in April. There was too much stuff coming at them. And from their perspective, was it 2016? It was 2016. Okay, April 2016. I've lost track. I thought it was 4 or 5 years ago. Every time I say 2016, I'm like, maybe it's 2015. But basically, you had too many fronts open up, which was a problem for them because they were overextended. They owned, again, all the way up into Tenal. They owned Venal. They owned, not owned Venal, but they owned Tribute. They were just big and not practiced, not disciplined, I guess. They weren't ready for big fights. It wasn't a big deal. Now, they knew that they were overextended. So at a certain point, they gave up Fountain. They gave up Delve, Fountain, moved north, and they started consolidating. They actually gave up Fountain and started to shrink a bit.
Yeah. I actually lived in Delve, and then we moved to Fountain, and then the Imperium seceded from Fountain, so I had to move again.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. And N3 did the same thing. Like the enemies of the Imperium did the same thing because they were too big. The jump changes restricted power projection. There was also SOV changes that came in that made an alliance have to protect their region a little more vigorously. They couldn't be overextended. So all that writing was on the wall as the changes were coming in 2015. So about 2016, they started to consolidate, or the end of 2015, the beginning of 2016, consolidate into the north. That allowed them to be a little more condensed, have their players nearer to each other so they could help each other if there was a fight to be had. And they were fine there for a little while. But as money started pouring in to cover the costs of invaders, I call it the Mercenary Wars, because that's what it seemed like to me. A lot of mercenaries were being hired. You had groups like Snuff. You had groups like Losec, not Signal Cartel, I'm drawing a blank. Cartel.
Hmm?
I just talked to him. Shadow Cartel. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Somebody will correct me, but yeah. So Shadow Cartel. I just talked about him earlier. Now, Shadow Cartel and Snuff, enemies, but for money they could be friends, and so they were both getting paid off. You had Adversity up there, who were part of Tissue. That was their alliance, actually, Tissue, and so you had them merking when they weren't really mercs. They're basically just taking money to menace, and they were menacing the north. And the point of that was to put a ton of pressure on that empire. Now, it didn't really spin off into something big until a couple factors happened. One is, I Want Isk decided they were angry enough at the Imperium Alliance, SMA, Space Monkeys Alliance, that they would say, I'm going to send some mercenaries your way. And Space Monkeys Alliance was like, we dare you to do it. Come on, take us on.
Because this all started with Space Monkeys, SMA. Like this whole situation.
There was multiple things happening, and I did a presentation on this in 2017, I think, called the Continuum of War. And you could, I forgot my presentation. Continuum of War. Look it up on the internet. EVE Online, EVE Vegas, 2017, and I explained briefly there, like some of the rivers that were flowing into this ocean of a campaign, and One of them was, one of the strongest ones, I think, was that Iwan Isk said, I'm putting contracts out on SMA. And that allowed a parallel movement by Lenny Kravitz, who was part of Iwan Isk, to say, hey, I know just the guys to hire, because he had already been paying people to menace Imperium. And so those two things came together, unlimited money with the contacts of mercenary groups that were being infused into this area. You also had, I think the money was a big part of it, right? Money was a big part of it to motivate people.
Yeah, it's a massive motivator for sure.
Right. It covered their bets. I know that NC Dot got paid like 3 months of moon renting equivalent so that they didn't have to worry about their moons. They didn't have to farm their moons to make money. They could go and do this campaign for 3 months and see if it worked. That allowed NC Dot, PL, and Test is a big one, to come north and to put pressure on the Imperium and collapse them, basically. And there were, mistakes made, but it was an overwhelming force. I remember the very first fight that happened was more or less a routine fight. It was a fight over destruction. There was some FCON super capitals in build in a pause, and the forces of the North combined to fight that and brought 1,400 fighters to this one system to destroy some capital ships in their ship hangar array. And the defensive fleet was only 800 from the Imperium. And instantly, and they arrived late. So instantly, the Northern attackers figured out they had more people than the notoriously big Imperium could repel. So the next fight that happened a few days later, Imperium matched that 1,400, and they brought 1,400 fighters to this fight. But by then, word had gotten out and enthusiasm had sprung up, and the Northern invaders brought 2,400. So it was a massive blob that essentially attacked the North. And at that point, at that same fight, actually, not only did the Imperium not have enough members, but GigX, who's in the audience now, made the decision to switch sides, and they were some of the most feared and fierce fighters of the Imperium. So at that point, not only were they outnumbered, but some of their numbers had gone down. Some of their best fighters had left and joined the other side. Although I don't know if he was declared himself neutral or if he was going to fight. I think he started fighting a few days later when it gets complicated, but the way that GigX explained it, there was a dispute with a corporation that drew them into the war, the World War B, but they didn't initially plan to get involved. They were just going to step aside. Remember, there's a lot of psychological warfare in EVE Online, and the Northern invaders, the Mercs, were basically saying, step aside, keep your land. We're not after you. We're after the B. And this is a big deal because this is why the Mittani and others reject the name World War B. They don't want it to be about them. It was about the coalition, not about them. Whereas the invaders were saying, no, it's not about your coalition. If FCON wants to go, we're not going to hurt them. If CO2 wants to go, we're going to bypass them. It's just about the Bs. And that's why it's such a controversial name, World War B.
Well, the other aspect of that is like that make people kind of go, well, really, was it about about Goonswarm? Because all of the fights and all of the land that was basically being taken away from Imperium at the time wasn't Goonswarm stuff. It was other it was the sort of like the satellite alliances, right? So to some degree you can kind of say like, well, if it's World War B and it's all about the B, it's all about like taking the fight to or killing Goonswarm, then why is it not Goonswarm's territory that's being being attacked rather than all of the satellite sort of states?
But because that's not how war works. You don't attack the strongest opponent. You annihilate or divide or break off bit by bit, whittling it down to its core, and then you attack its core. it's how all Eve warfare happens. You cause confusion among the allies. You look for the weakest ones and you pound them first and you break them off. You make the game not fun for them. And they're like, sorry guys, we're out of here. This is not what we signed up for. It's not fun anymore. We're just getting wrecked all the time. So we'll see you later. And you break off the small and weaker alliances first, then the medium alliances, and then you go for the core alliance. That's how war works. So part of the psychological warfare was to convince groups that they weren't the target. Therefore, World War B had extra meaning that was rejected by the Imperium. And this caused a problem for CCP, who wanted to promote this war and picked up the name. First, they picked up the name the Easter War, and nobody liked that title. So people were criticizing CCP for publicizing that. So they fumbled around. I think they named it a second thing. And then finally they said, okay, World War B, that seems to be what everybody wants. And that injected CCP into the discussion about what this war actually was called. And I feel bad for CCP not being able to figure out how to position the fact that a huge thing was happening in the game without calling it a name. So that was a big problem. And what you'll see is CCP created banners for either side: the Money Badger Coalition, as it became known, the Northern Invaders, and the Imperium. And they created artwork for the character traits behind them. And that infuriated the Imperium because their artwork had a bee in it. I think that's what it was. It was a bee. And they were like, you're just reinforcing the narrative that it's all about us, not our group. And CCP was like confused by that. And they said, oh, okay, we'll switch the artwork out. So they switched the artwork out. Do we have artwork? Let me see if I can pull that up. In any case, there was a big struggle about that. Let me just close that. There's a big struggle about the naming of World War B. And this is important for later, as we'll get to that in just a second. So then you have this war happens. The North buckles under the overwhelming pressure of Money Badger Coalition, and they retreat to, as we said here in Lone Trek, they retreated to, where's Lone Trek? This forward operating base here, they being the Imperium. Now, some groups snuck out, like FCON made a deal, said, let us pass to the south. We don't want any part of this. We're out of here. They took off. CO2 said, we never liked Imperium anyway. We're flipping sides. If you want, we'll kill them too. And they started shooting them. So CO2's on the other side. The Bastion retreated to where the Imperium was. I think TNT did the same thing. I think Executive Outcomes did as well, but they were small and they eventually collapsed a few weeks later anyway, but they stuck it out with them. And a lot of the Imperium said, right, we're out of here. What's that?
Yeah, Razor kind of disappeared somewhere.
The joke was, where's Razor? Where's Razor? Because Razor used to be this big, powerful alliance, but it wasn't showing up to any of the World War B fights. So the joke became, where's Razor? And so you'll hear every once in a while, people will say, I found Razor. Razor's over here. And there'll be like a fleet of 3 or something. So it's the joke that, like, here they are, the long lost, alliance that was big and mighty at one time is like 3 or 4 people somewhere here and there. Although Razor got the last laugh because Sully, a member of Razor, as he's known, was the one that got the 4 trillion loot drop out of the structures recently. So 4 trillion is the biggest loot drop ever. It's the biggest payday ever in EVE Online, and it was done by Razor. So back to World War B, that's how it pretty much ended. There was a standoff in Sereninen, and there was a lot of fighting there. Remember, there was EVE Online. There was new stuff in EVE Online at the time. One is structures were just coming in. This is right when structures were hitting, right before. And faxes had just been released as well because there was a capital rebalance. And so what you had is people trying to figure out in Sereninen how to use force auxiliaries, faxes. Basically, they used to be logistic carriers. And so there was a lot of fights between really cheap doctrines that Imperium had, the Hurricanes. And they would just constantly launch Hurricanes at Pandemic Legion's faxes and just destroy fax after fax. So sometimes Pandemic Legion would lose the ISK fight, the efficiency fight against Imperium, even though the Imperium had been evicted from the north. They were still pretty strong in Serenin. And there was a lot of fighting that went on for a few weeks. And at that point, they were starting to claw back some of the systems. But here's the thing that changed and really ended World War B, in my mind anyway. And that was the very first keep started drop in Nullsec. It wasn't the first keep started drop. That one was in Wormhole Space, Hard Knocks, in Rage system, which would later be killed by Initiative famously. But the second keep started drop, and the first one to drop in known space was dropped in Decline. And it was dropped by Sort Dragon. I actually forget the system, but I can look it up. But the first keep star really ended World War B, because even if the Imperium had clawed its way back and taken system after system after system because of the new sovereignty mechanics, they would have to assault that keep star. And at the time, the keep stars were very, very powerful because of mechanic changes, the timers and tie-dye and how it worked together. So taking out a keep star at that time was incredibly difficult. And if it was a defended keep star, it was nearly impossible. So I think the calculation was made that even if we take back all our territory, which we can't do because there's too many northern invaders in the Money Badgers, they still have a keep star now that has onlined, and they have a second one coming on this week. Horde was the group that put down the second keep star, and NC was the third, I believe. What's that?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of where the keep stars were put, because I know that obviously, CO2 had the MTAC-O keep star, but I'm wondering whether that was transferred to them, or was that the first one that was dropped? Because I know it wasn't the first one that died.
Maybe GigX could tell us. I think it was no, it wasn't the first. It might have been the third or fourth, and it might have been transferred to them, or they might have put down their own. I think it was one of the early ones, though. Yeah. Well, anyway,
the first keep star to die was actually in Feather Bolus, but one hadn't actually onlined. Someone tried to drop it and it died before it actually on. But it was the first online keep star was in the north.
Yeah, it was the first military keep star, the first real one to drop, in known space. Yeah, and that really solidified to me an impossible situation for the Imperium to reconquer. So at that point, they had already made plans to move to Delve, which was at that point full of smaller alliances. It's what Tribute is right now. Small alliances kind of fighting each other. There's no real strong power controlling the whole area. So they eyeballed it. They put down Astra houses, and they basically did what we call lily padding all the way down to Delve, from Serenin all the way down to the south. And that they set that up for a few days as a logistical achievement, to be sure. But they moved their entire capital fleet at the time. The super capital fleet wasn't found because if the super capital fleet had emerged, it would be probably attacked by the super capital fleet of the combined forces of the North. So I don't think that Goonswarm wanted that at risk. That was a big thing, is this to save the super capitals. So they let those kind of hide for a long time. But they did take capitals and equipment down to Delve. Were you part of that evacuation?
I think I did at some. I was part of that evacuation to some degree, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody was. That's part of Goonswarm and the Imperium to some degree, but it happened over a long period of time. It wasn't. There was one big move up that was half done before people figured out that it was moving. And the only person that chased them was Pro God Legend from Now Test, who was like, "Come on, guys, let's keep the pressure on them before they can reconstitute and become strong again." And everybody else was like, "Nah, we're gonna stay up here in the north and play with the treasure." And you know how the pirates come into the treasure room and they're kind of jumping in the giant piles of treasure and the chains and the cups and all that stuff. That's what the North was doing at the time. Pro God Legend was the only guy that was like, no, we got to follow them to Delve and keep that pressure on them. because Pro God Legend is, and has always been, a real opponent of Imperium. Although he's friendly with them and he plays other games with them and stuff like that, he's always been an opponent of theirs. So Delve is starting to get constituted by Imperium. In the north, you have groups like Sword Dragons, Darkness, and Guardians of the Galaxy, later called Dead Coalition, starting to take up territory in Decline. You have CO2 keeping its territory in Tribute. You have groups like Test moving in and taking, I believe they took part of Tribute, I want to say, or Vale. And CO2 and Test become friendly. And, you know, GOTG or Darkness was also friendly with them. But PL and Northern Coalition, they take Tribute, and they let everything kind of settle down before they start saying, well, what are we going to do now? So tensions rise between CO2 and Northern Coalition, which leads to a war. Test allies itself with CO2. Sword Dragon and Guardians of the Galaxy says, don't look at us, we're out of it. And so the fight happens, and that's where you get the first Keep Star killed that was defended, and that is the CO2 Keep Star in Tribute. That's an MTAC-O. Now this is important because it sets something up. Where is CO2? Let's see if I can find it. It's an MTAC-O. There it is. It's hard
the
to
situation
find.
Basically showed that, like, you know, just because you flipped from being, you know, hostile to being a friend doesn't mean that you have a you know, a free license to carry on being a friend past a certain period of time.
Yeah. So you
end up becoming content.
Yeah. Right. So CO2 and Test move south, and that's a different chapter. We'll cover that a different day. But essentially, Test had participated in World War B, we'll call it. And the Imperium would not forget that, because remember, Vili was an FC for Goonswarm for a long time, Fountain War, and even before that. He'd left the game for a while. He came back and he wanted something different. He saw Test was kind of a blank slate at the time. Test had diminished in power. There's a lot of people there, but they weren't organized well. They weren't led well. And so he thought, here's some clay I can mold. And he did. He moved to Test, came back, said, I'll be friendly with you, Goonswarm, but I'm going to do my own thing here. And then ProGod joined Snuff after Nulli Segunda was destroyed, or just kind of quit Nulli Segunda. And he went over to Snuff and then said, and he went over to Snuff because Snuff was really one of the main corporations, and Snuff had been in Nulli Segunda called Elnal. So he went over to Snuff for a little while, and then he just couldn't play low sec. He didn't like it. He wanted null sec. That's his gameplay. That's what he's good at as far as FCing. And he had made a promise to Dur to join Test at one point, because in the Fountain War, Pro God Legend was really fleet commanding for Test, an ally, even though he belonged to Nulli Segunda. So he had relationships with them. So he ended up in Test 2, and Test constituted a stronger and stronger alternative to joining Goonswarm and joining other groups. And they grew into a powerful position. And they moved up north and participated in this World War B, and that really put them on the map as somebody significant. There was some comedy moments when Test was moving north and PL, Killer B actually, jumped on Pro God Legend and kind of took a couple bites out of Test as Test was moving into position for the war, which is kind of funny because Killer B never really forgave him for that. Remember, Killer B is basically a protege of Pro God Legend. They were both in Nulli Segunda together. That's where Killer B went after. Killer B got his start in Black Legion, but he went to Nulli Segunda, really established himself as an FC, and then he went over to Pandemic Legion, and he was one of the factors in World War B in that he was invigorated to get PL into this fight and sold it to them, and he FC'd it, and he FC'd Money Badgers. Essentially, he was the coalition or the super coalition leader, one of them at least. So there's some comedy moments there between Pro God and Killer B, and also Test and PL. But But Test was part of World War B, and the Imperium would not forget that. So later, we'll wrap up soon here, but later, as Test was knocked out of the north by NC Dot and PL, and so was CO2, they came down and they formed Legacy Coalition. So remember, CO2 was part of Legacy when it started. It was one of the stronger members of Legacy. It was really CO2 and Test that were the powerhouses, and Brave Alliance was in there as well, or Brave Newbies. And they all decided when they came down south as essentially refugees that they were going to move into Catch. And Catch at the time, Catch, Impasse, all of the southern regions here, were all dominated by Stain. Stain is an NPC place, so nobody can conquer Stain. But Stain is a hellhole, and this has like always been dominated by Russians. It's called Stain Wagon, and wagon meaning all these little alliances that get into this wagon, and they cart around and just fight everybody in Stain. And it's been this way since the very beginning, but occasionally they will grow into like Catch and Impasse. So they will grow into these regions and kind of influence them and dominate them. But by the time CO2 and Test came down, they kind of had this war. Now, interestingly enough, Legacy Coalition formed, started invading this area to make a new home. And it was Vili who said, I want a new home because I need territory to build super capitals, because once we have super capitals, we will be taking Test to that next level where they can compete on the global stage and be able to more or less hold their own against anyone. So the plan was get yourself a home, build some industry, build some super capitals, and take it to the next level. And that's what they wanted to do in the south when they retreated there. But Stain had other plans, saying, hey, that's our territory. We're going to defend it. And we're going to have the help of our friend over here, Goonswarm and Imperium, because there's a traditional goodwill between Russians and these Russians and Goonswarm. The problem is Stain wasn't really prepared for a war. And Delve, the Goonswarm Imperium Delve group, wasn't ready to fight a new war. They had just started to establish Delve as their home. They were only there a few months and this war started. So from my understanding, the FC Asher Elias tried to help Stain realize they weren't organized, that people weren't showing up. And they said, well, we're not going to defend the territory for you, so we're backing out. So Imperium backed out, Stain fell, Legacy was born. Those three things happened. Legacy being born, they mostly fought off... I don't know if they fought anybody after that. They fought off Stain and just kind of pacified the entire area and started growing. Things get very complicated with CO2 and Triumvirate and FCON or Phoenix Coalition. So things, and Skill U as well. Things start to get complicated. I can't go into that. It's a whole nother hour. But eventually it's just Test really dominating Legacy as CO2 falls out of not only the coalition, but essentially falls out of the game. So what you have after World War B is an alliance between Delve, the Imperium, and Legacy Coalition. They decide they're going to be friendly towards each other for mutual defense. I don't think Delve wanted to be invaded. They were, again, starting to build this industry. Legacy was doing the same thing, and they weren't going to invade each other, but they decided that, you know, they needed to be careful that PL, NC, Horde was not a factor at the time, but maybe CO2, not CO2, but I think maybe Triumvirate.
Well, yeah, the most recent sort of like, you know, history in terms of bad blood that that Test had was essentially, you know, with the you know, the northern forces of PL, NC, and them. So like essentially that's the reason why it seemed more beneficial and more mutually sort of agreeable to be friends with Imperium. And so obviously, you know, the whole kind of Imperial legacy thing sort of started to appear.
Yeah, I needed a breather there. Thanks. I have to wrap up because my voice is going. This happens when I talk too much, which is probably why I
It
like
has
hosting.
been story time. It has been kind of like historical storytelling with Matterall.
I got to get you the real people that did all this stuff because they can explain all the small stuff that was really interesting. So at this point, you have Delve here and Legacy Coalition. You have Imperium and Legacy kind of come together in 2018 to defend themselves against PL and this new group fraternity that was coming up on the flank of Legacy. Remember, PL and NC, they're still hyper powerful. They're hugely powerful at this point too, because the game is changing towards setting up industry, setting up rorquals, setting up defensive fleets to protect those rorquals. This is all happening. This hasn't happened. It's happening at the time. It's still in a fragile situation. And they're building that. So if that gets interfered with too much by already powerful groups like PL and NC, it could cause problems. So they basically start to help each other. They form this Imperial Coalition, and that's when you get the alliance between Delve and
there was
Impasse.
the kind of like the real kind of the real strong kind of roots in terms of the alliance between Imperium and Legacy really kind of came along near the end of or I would probably say in the middle of the fighting of between fraternity, because essentially there was fraternity and fraternity's alliance, which was Winter Coalition, and Legacy were basically going at it, and it was somewhat of a dead heat to some degree until you had the likes of PL and NC friendly groups coming in to help, and then PL and NC decided at some particular point that they were going to get involved, and so they, I think we did cover this on the TIS show way back then, where we actually, visualized their fleet movements down from the north to the south in order to help out fraternity brothers, and essentially when that occurred, Imperium came to the aid of Legacy Coalition, and that's basically where the solidification of the Imperium Imperium Legacy like super coalition kind of occurred. Like it wasn't down to just Imperium and Legacy basically going, yeah, we don't like agreeing that we're definitely going to be friends now. It was a product of of external factors.
Right. And right. But there was also a relationship between Matani and Vili or Asher and Vili that could be worked with. I think probably Matani, because Matani's been there longer. It could be worked with. Not everybody was happy with that arrangement, but I don't think there were some things that happened that were like flare points. And during I could really go into this, but I need more time, and I'm going to lose my voice, so I can't finish, unfortunately. But to bring it up to speed,
up to today,
yeah,
right?
Let me bring it up to today, and then we can just end for the day. To bring it up to today, there was a resentment between the Imperium and Legacy that Test was a part of that invasion, and they were taught to hate Test. But when the Imperium Legacy came into existence for mutual defense, they had to release a propaganda campaign to say Test is our friend, Test is good, don't attack them, don't worry about them. And and that worked to their benefit, because 2018 was a big year of those two groups really standing together and being able to deflect a lot of what would normally destroy other alliances, a lot of power coming at them. So PL bounced off of Test and became a lesser form of PL, because they just lost a bunch of they lost a lot of prestige.
It was
NC did the same thing.
Yeah, their prestige kind of faltered somewhat in the battle of
UALX.
What was it? It was where there you are, UALX. Like that was the first time where essentially a shield super cap fleet took on an armor supercat fleet and prevailed, which was, that was something that was unheard of, prior to that particular moment.
Here's UALX, big fight. And the shield. So what was happening this year, this 2018, this is one of the best battles of EVE Online's history. Needs to be totally written down, and someday I'll do it. But hopefully other people will. UALX marks an incredible shift of power and prestige, and Test really comes out the winner on this because they had invested heavily in a shield super doctrine, and everybody else was going armor. I think Delve at that point, or Imperium, was up north attacking the north and trying to overpower some of the decayed powers that were up there. That was their armor super capital fleet on deployment. And Imperium, because they were doing a lot of mining, needed to have other supers stay in the south. So those were the shield supers that stayed in the south. So when UALX hit, the whole map was kind of at war with one another. And the Battle of UALX was reinforced as Test was basically, Test and Brave were defending themselves against basically fraternity that was led by Elo Knight of Black Legion, but also Pandemic Legion and a few other groups. Pandemic Legion was mad at Test because Test essentially took away Providence that PL had conquered right before the transition of NPC stations becoming Fortizars, which meant that the payday for capturing Providence that would have gone to PL instead went to Test because they took it from him at the last second. So PL was mad. They wanted some revenge. UALX happens in that context. PL's mad at him. Skillu is coming down from the drone regions. Triumvirate's there. You have a lot of really strong groups that have had a whole history of being strong for a long time. And Test defended themselves, and Brave too, but with the help of Goonswarm, which showed up with their shield supers that were already in the south. So that's what happened in UALX. Yes, the armor fleets of Northern Coalition and Imperium started moving south to confront each other, and they got held up in different systems along the way. So they never really made it to UALX, but they were coming. And that's when we thought this was going to blow into possibly one of the biggest fights the game has ever seen. It really was at that point already, but it was going to eclipse everything before it. But when Goonswarm started to enter the system, the server started to crash under the pressure of too many people in one system. And it was only 1 hour away from downtime anyway. So at that point, PL said, fight's over, lay low. We'll fight again a different day. And PL was trapped. Triumvirate was trapped. A lot of groups were trapped there for several days.
That was also after the Keepstar, after Test's Keepstar that they were fighting on had actually died to the NC to the the armor supers kind of forces. So normally you would kind of think that a super fleet that's defending a Keepstar, if that Keepstar dies, that's kind of like rip that super fleet that's on the Keepstar sort of thing, because they don't have a place to dock up and they're likely going to get heavily bubbled. But it was a case of that Keepstar dying and additional forces jumping into the system.
Yeah, there was some comedy again.
The node.
There was some comedy there again with again Pro God Legend, because they were fighting over a forward operating base that Test had put down. So Test puts down a Keepstar, it gets attacked. That's what that fight was over. It is destroyed by PL and their allies, or Fraternity PL and their allies. But in the process of destroying it, they get trapped. So their fleets are trapped there because of downtime and the server crash. And what does ProGod do? He puts down another Keepstar right on top of them, like the very next morning. It was a pretty comical moment. Like everything they'd fought over didn't matter, and they were trapped. And this Keepstar is onlining anyway. So objective was really won by Test with some style.
It was the most literal already replaced moment in Eve.
So that's what happened. big moment, pivotal for Test. Test becomes a superpower at that point, because at that point it starts to really hold its own against Fraternity and all these guys that attacked him. It also, backed up by the Imperium, looked really beefy, really strong, hard to beat. They become allies for quite some time. They sign a non-invasion pact, and things are going to be good for a while, and they were good. Later on, Vili would have enough clout to enhance Imperium's hand when Imperium was at war in the north, but also eventually attack Geminate and create some problems for Horde, who was now becoming a competitor state in the north, up here in Geminate. And Horde has a very interesting story. We won't go into it today, but essentially they were the little brother of NC Dot and PL that didn't get any traction with them, especially PL. PL would not listen to Horde. It was the little brother that it would just kind of say, go play with somebody else. And NC Dot was like the big brother's friend, right? And the big brother's friend was like, well, don't be so mean to your little brother Horde here. He can hang out with us. It's all right with me. And so so Horde really liked NC Dot and started working with them instead of Pandemic Legion. And it was funny for that relationship to blossom over time. But over time, Horde has a plan that it's executing, and it's growing, and it's starting at this point to become very powerful. And eventually Horde will take over the coalition. It will be the leading voice between NC Dot and PL and that whole power center. So Horde grows up to become a teenager, and it eclipses its big brother, Pandemic Legion. But that's, again, for a different day. But at this point, Vili sees that needs to be disrupted, and he goes up there and starts to harass them a little bit. Not long, not a big campaign, but in that time, there is a fight for the Forge. The Forge is a system in the center of the galaxy. It's pacified Empire space. It can't be taken over, dominated by anyone, but structures can be put right next to Jita, can be put in the Jita system, which is the major trade hub of the game, but it can be put right next to it. The Tranquility Tower is born in Perimeter. Let's see if I can find it. And as we described earlier, an alliance is created between Vili, Goblins of Horde, and Vili's contact Matani in the south, and an unlikely union is made to make money off high sec. And this happens at the same time the Drifters are attacking Goonswarm in the south, or the Imperium in the south, and really made them mad. So they wanted to take it out on CCP, but you can't hurt CCP. That's the company that makes the game. So they said, we're going to take it out on you guys that are making fun of us in HighSec. We're going to attack HighSec. We're getting into a Discord together. All the leaders of NullSec, we'll call it Null first. And it was basically not effective. But the trappings, right, was that NullSec, the outlaw space, is going to conquer known space, and we're going to take over HighSec, and we're going to burn down everybody in HighSec. We're going to bring the pain to HighSec. That never really happened. What did happen was that Vili put up a trade center for commerce to make billions and billions, and he roped NullSec in to receive some of those profits. And that is what did come of Null First. Yeah.
Initially the two, opposing sides that were part of this kind of deal weren't actually talking, but the whole Drifter situation and the Null First kind of catalyst basically caused a situation where they did actually start speaking. They realized that they could make sort of mutually agreeable deals for this this Tranquility Trade Tower. That's how that's why it's there. That's why it still stands. That's why you don't see Goonswarm killing it or sort of NC killing it or anything like that.
Right. So it's not just nullsec powers at this point. You also have the people who've been working those areas. You have Eve Mogul in there, and you also have ICU, or I Choose You is their actual name. And that guy, because it's just a guy in his corporation, had learned how to use Fortizars to do offshoring taxes. which just means that you can buy products in JITA, but you can run the actual transaction through a player-made facility and get some tax savings on it for the person that's doing the buying or the selling. And some of that tax profit, although it's a lot less than JITA, goes to actual players instead of out of the game. So that's called offshoring. And that business had already existed, but it needed protection. And for the most part, it was protected by Horde, who was nearby, right? Remember, they're in Geminate. They're right here. And the offshoring is happening right there. Neighbors. But Vili marches up from the south and essentially captures the forge and then cuts a deal with Horde. They say, let's stop fighting each other. Let's just make some money. And they join forces. That had to be okay with Vili's partner in Delve, and it was. So they negotiated a deal. The locals and the protection racket of Nullsec. And that is what Tranquility Trade Center is today. So this is why Test getting ready to maybe become enemies with their friends in Delve is a really big gamble for Vili. Like, can they maintain friendship over this and continue to disperse the money and keep business the same for Tranquility? We don't know that yet. Are Tranquility structures in danger? We don't know that yet. If there is a whiff that those things can be destroyed, people won't use them. That is a huge money loser for everybody involved. So we don't know what's going to happen there. So here's the last thing I'll say about this, and then we'll wrap up. World War B2. What's that mean? We explained today, like what, God, I feel like I'm teaching a class. We explained today what World War B looked like. That Test was actually the enemy of Goonswarm and the Imperium. But when they moved to the south, they benefited by helping each other out, defending themselves. And in that time, they were able to forge some business together, but also be able to both benefit from that situation and grow strong. So what happens is when this news gets out, or through spies or whatever else, the Mittani says on the Meta Show, you know, we know what you're up to. We know that this is not just you dissolving the non-invasion pact. We know you're out to get us and attack us, and we're never going to forget. There will never be peace between our groups again. You are in our red doghouse. You're our enemy for now and forever. And one of the jokes that the FC Asher Elias says is, we should call this World War B to confuse everybody. And so that's why it's called World War B from the point of view of Delve. And there's some irony there. First of all, they didn't like that name when it was applied to the war of 2016 because it made everybody think they were just fighting Goonswarm, not the Imperium. So they hated that name, rejected it, and said this war in the North in 2016 is called the War of Solveless Aggression. That was Mittani's name for it. But a different name.
A terrible name.
Which was a funny, I think it was a great name. It was a great name. I mean,
it was very
American history.
It was a great name. Yeah, it was a great name as a descriptor for what was actually going on and why.
It was a lot to unpack.
Certain people were fighting.
The Civil War in America
it wasn't
is called,
actually succinct.
Yeah, the Civil War in America is called the War of Northern Aggression, which is basically a Southern perspective of like, hey, the North is attacking us. So it's a one-sided view. So that's that. And that's where he gets the name from. But what's interesting about it is solveless aggression. Mittani was highlighting that, excuse me, was highlighting that if CCP wants people to grow empires by owning territory, this is not the way to do it. Because the people who don't have Sov are the ones that are attacking us that do. That was his contention about World War B and why it was the war of Sovless aggression. Now, the other name came around from Noisy Gamer, who called it the Casino War because he likes looking at numbers. And he was noticing how much casino money was getting into the game, and he called this the Casino War because it's all bought by casino money. Money Badger was doing a meme on that saying, yeah, we're the Money Badgers. We're like Honey Badgers, this old coalition, but we're getting paid. That was their joke. It's a very memey name for the alliance. But the truth of it was the Casino War was then embraced by, we'll call it World War B deniers. people who didn't want to use World War B. It was popular, but they didn't want to use it. So they latched on to Casino War because that was also a way of saying this was an unfair war, reminding everybody that casinos funded this war to begin it. Again, the money badgers would say, yeah, we're getting paid. Look at us. It's fun. And that was a very big meme. But they will also say, we didn't do it for the money. We did it for the momentum. We always wanted to do this. The money got us started, but the momentum kept us going. Figuring out that we could win is what kept us together as the money badgers and is what led to World War B's victory for the North. Or I should say for the invading powers or the money badgers. So throwing World War B out there as this war that's happening now is a way of confusing the issue. So when people talk about World War B in 5 years, they won't know which one it was. And it's psychological warfare to confuse the issue, which is very interesting. It's an interesting move by Asher. But we've been hearing World War B2, and you could say TOO or TWO. It works either way. But this is basically another war where it looks like Test is lining up with Pandemic Legion, their enemy, Northern Coalition, Horde, which is now a powerful alliance, but Snuff as well from LowSec. These are guys that all fought in the First World War B, and they're lining up, it looks like, to fight in World War B2. We'll leave it there because my voice is gone. But if you want to hear more stories like this, let us know. If this is what we like, story time, that sort of stuff. But we have people like Elise Randolph that can just tell you great information about many, many different battles. So yeah, if you like this kind of stuff, we'll bring more your way with people who can really put some color on a lot of the stuff that we've gone through. We just went through 4 or 5 years of EVE Online warfare. Yeah. There's a ton of stuff that happened that we didn't cover.
I think it was contextual. I think it was contextual for the moment though, because we were talking about like essentially, the history of Test's kind of involvement with both Goons and NCPL, that kind of thing. So it makes sense in this at this particular time of these particular sort of situations, moments in EVE, to know the context of either why Test is doing what they're doing, and what could result from it.
Right. So close us out with some closing remarks on like what people should do for Talking in Stations to help us kind of stay in business and stay doing this sort of work and watching and like all that stuff. Because my voice is gone.
Gone, man. So if you like the content and you're not already, if you're not following us on Twitch, then definitely go and hit that follow button for us. Obviously, we wouldn't ask people to sub to us, but if you feel you want to, then go right ahead. We love it. But
or Patreon,
it doesn't, or Patreon, but it doesn't stop us. Like, not getting subs doesn't stop us from producing content. It's always a nice thing to receive. Obviously we have Patreon that Matterall said at patreon.com/Matterall.
So let's say that again. Patreon.com/Matterall. The reason we push Patreon is because that's like a subscription almost to Talking in Station, which is the podcast. It allows us more room to buy software like we just did last night to do some masking for cameras and stuff like that, and to raise our production values, which is why we push that a lot. But there's also Twitch and other things.
Yeah, it's like a different way to support us in whichever way you want to. And obviously, all of the videos that we have that we do on Twitch get pushed to our YouTube channel. So if you miss these things, or if you want to watch them again, but you don't want to watch them through the terrible Twitch phone app, but you don't mind the YouTube app for your phone, then you can definitely check that out. Give us a follow on there and a sub there. Obviously the subs on YouTube don't cost anything, but it helps us out.
All right, so stay tuned for Ron, who's patrolling Test Space. He's somebody that'll take you through this war in a really good way. He's a great guy, great to listen to. Stay tuned for Ron USMC. Here you go.
Mm-hmm. Nice.